A lot has happened, and a lot of people have lost their lives. The new prime minister has to communicate and listen to people, to know what people want. It's the most important thing. He has to pay attention to the voice of the people.
After months of civil unrest, a state of emergency, and the surprise resignation of a prime minister, Ethiopia has a new leader. Abiy Ahmed is a member of the Oromo people, the ethnic community behind mass protests against government oppression that have often turned deadly. But while Ahmed is the first prime minister from the Oromo tribe, he's also considered an insider with the ruling party. So can he unite a nation, or is he providing cover to keep things just the way they are? Well, joining us from Washington is journalist Mohammed Ademo. He's the founder and editor of the news website Oromo Pride. And we have Bronwyn Bruton. She's the deputy director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. I thank you both for joining us. Mohammed, let me begin with you. The last time I spoke to you, you were not too keen on some of the government's actions with regards to what was happening in the Oromo region and so forth, and the protests and the state of emergency. Are you willing to give credit where it's due now, given that there's a new prime minister who's inspiring a lot of hope for a lot of people?
Yes, but the credit goes to the protesters who brought the new prime minister to power, not the other way around. If you remember the last time we spoke, he was newly elected as the vice president of Oromia Regional State in large measure as a way to respond to those relentless protests. And the protest essentially swept him to power, and he's done some good things along the way to get to where he is right now. But ultimately, today is a good day, is a hopeful day for Ethiopia, and that is largely because of the sacrifices of democracy activists and in this case, especially the Oromo protesters over the last 4 years.
Bronwyn, do you agree with that it came from the protesters and eventually the state had to listen?
Absolutely. There's no question whatsoever that this is not business as usual for the Ethiopian government. The election of a Oromo prime minister and also a young prime minister, I think, speaks volumes to the effect that the protests have had. It's really unprecedented. And I think that Mohammed is correct to sound a note of caution. We don't know whether Dr. Abiy is going to be successful in instituting real reforms in Ethiopia, but there's no question that this is a watershed moment and that the protesters have really accomplished something that few of us thought to see.
Yeah, so Mohammed, it's clear that the sting, I guess, has been taken out of some of the trouble for the moment in the short term. That can only be a good thing. What can he do? And I know this, there's going to be confirmation in a couple of weeks and he has to announce his new cabinet and so forth. What can he do to give you the strong indication that perhaps the political and economic marginalization of the Oromo people is coming to an end?
The list is very, very long, and it's mostly the demands that protesters have been putting forward. But I think one thing that is very important in this case is there are two centers of power in Ethiopia today. That is the power of the people and the power that comes from the security military establishment. And this is a young leader, largely seen among the Oromo as a reformer. He takes over a country that is deeply fractured, a ruling party that is deeply divided in ways that we have not seen in its entire history. So I think he faces very, very challenging road ahead. But the first thing he can do really is to lift the state of emergency, which he did not vote for when Parliament voted earlier last month. And that will give him the civilian powers that he needs, because the state of emergency gives power to the military, which essentially makes his role, his position for the next 5 months ceremonial. So unless the state of emergency is lifted, none of the things that he talked about today in terms of talking to the opposition, opening up the political environment, reaching out to opposition and dissidents in diaspora, and reforming the economy, none of those things are going to materialize as long as the military is in control. The question really now is, how much of the things that he talked about today in his very inspiring speech that the establishment, the deep state, would allow him to put to work.
Right. And Mohammed, is it possible that he's going to face resistance from the deep state, as you call them, or the military establishment? Is he going to face resistance to taking that state of emergency off the table for Ethiopians? Might that be a problem for him?
Yes, there is no question that he's going to face a resistance, because if you look at just the way his election came about, the establishment, in this case, the Tigrayan Liberation Front, People's Liberation Front, TPLF leaders who control the security in the military, campaigned vigorously against him, a very open campaign, and of course a lot of relentless attack internally, according to sources, where he was criticized and demonized and accused of enabling a color revolution, which basically meant that he was willing to listen to the protesters. So there is no question that he will face resistance, but he has power, he has leverage that comes from his broad-based support, which cuts across ethnic divides, across even political divides. If he leverages that support and use that leverage against the military establishment, I think he has a chance. He has a historic opportunity to remake Ethiopia anew and ensure that a new era of democracy and equality can take hold. But he will face resistance.
Yeah. So, Bronwyn, we have Mohammed calling it a deeply fractured society. We have others saying that the dream of Meles Zenawi, you know, of ethnic federalism has failed. A lot of people are deeply divided in terms of tribe in the country. Is it going to be easy for the Tigrayan minority, or those in power who come from the Tigrayan minority, to take their hands off the levers of power?
No, I think it's not. I mean, I think Mohammed's done a very excellent job of pointing out that effectively this is a compromise gesture by those individuals who are maintaining power now. But it remains to be seen how far they're going to go. The lifting of the state of emergency is very important to the protesters. And I think it's something that's going to be very difficult for the hardliners within the Tigrayan elite to agree to. If they don't, then I think optimism will wither very quickly and you'll see people going back on the street. And so what Dr. Abiy has to do is persuade these individuals inside of the military, inside of what Mohammed has called the deep state, that it is in their interest to let him make some very meaningful, very visible reforms very, very quickly. Effectively, his appointment has bought time. But if it isn't followed up with concrete action rapidly, then the situation will deteriorate.
Mohammed, how much of a priority will it be to try to seek justice for alleged human rights violations and extrajudicial killings?
I think he will have to be very careful about what to make a priority. I think there are a whole bunch of things he can do, and justice is very important. I think the country needs healing, it needs a national consensus, a national dialogue. But I think that needs to come first before going after some of these generals and others who are implicated in egregious human rights abuses as documented by human rights organizations. But the most important thing he needs to do now is release the remaining political prisoners who are in jail, release the prisoners who have been rearrested less than a month after they were released under a government amnesty. Start there and then reach out to the opposition, sit down and chart a future that includes the opposition, because this government has been in power for 27 years and they cannot solve all the problems. The problems are money alone, and they need to seek partners from the opposition, from the protesters, and I think eventually go forward by reforming the judiciary, freeing it from the shackles of the executive branch, and then and only then justice can be sought. Because as it is, the judiciary, the courts, are doing the bidding of the executive branch. They have been doing the bidding of the executive branch. That needs to change before we can talk about justice.
Okay, very finally, Bronwyn, when he names his cabinet, will it have to be a compromise cabinet that includes the old and the new to try and balance things?
I think I think that it has to be. It's wonderful to think of him coming in and replacing all the old TPLF stalwarts with young people and reformers and enthusiastic new minds. But the reality is that this is a very delicate balancing act, and there has to be a feeling of security on both sides. The protesters have to feel that things are changing, but I do think that the old guard in the TPLF also has to be reassured that their interests are being protected. Otherwise, again, the situation is so fragile that I think you could easily see a reversion to the status quo. For many, many years, when Hailemariam Desalegn was the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, he had no power at all. And I think that in a worst case scenario, what you'll see is that Dr. Abiy will overreach and that you'll revert to this status quo of the Prime Minister effectively being a fig leaf for others who are operating behind the scenes. He does have support from the Oromo people and from others, many others in the Ethiopian society. But I don't know how effective that's going to be if he goes too far too fast. It's a very, very delicate line that he has to walk.
Okay, well, we'll be watching his tenure very closely. Abiy Ahmed, the new Prime Minister, he'll be sworn in very, very soon. For the moment, Bronwyn Bruton and Mohammed Ademo, I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers. Talk to you soon.